Paws Academy. It's not just training, it's training that clicks.
Welcome to Barks to Basics. This is the podcast where we look beneath the surface of dog behaviour and ask what's really going on inside the canine brain. So my name's Renee, I'm the founder of Paws Academy, and today's episode is one that sits at the heart of the way we approach our work. So we're talking about something we've developed in-house here. It's a method we like to call Trust Step. Now, this is a structured, choice-led approach to supporting reactive, fearful or anxious dogs. And I'll be honest, when people first see or hear about this method in action, they sometimes assume that it's just about treat throwing, but really there's so much more going on than meets the eye. Trust Step is all about neuroscience, emotional safety, predictability, and above all, giving dogs control over their experience. So in this episode, we're going to look at the method in detail. We'll look at why we created it, what makes it different from more sort of traditional approaches, how it's grounded in current behavioural science. And I'll also share real life examples from the dogs we've worked with and finish with a few reflections of what it actually means to shift from managing behaviour to actually reshaping your dog's experience. So if we start off with the core question that led us here, why control matters? So for years and years, and dog training has really focused on the idea that we need to correct, redirect or condition behaviour into something more acceptable. But the more we've actually learned about canine neuroscience, the more we begin to see that this outward behaviour, so when I'm talking about outward behaviours, I'm talking about barking, lunging, retreating, it's really just the tip of the iceberg. And underneath all of that, or those behaviours, is the nervous system. And that nervous system of your dog is quite often overwhelmed. It's dysregulated. It's trying to create distance from something it perceives as unsafe. So you'll notice this, and it's truer for fearful dogs. Their reactions aren't necessarily strategic, they're more reflective. So when his dog is scared, the amygdala takes over. That's part of the brain responsible for threat detection. It's ancient, it works fast, and when it fires, the prefrontal cortex, which we would probably know as the thinking part of the brain, the decision part in the brain, this sort of goes offline. It's what goes out the park, it's not even working. And so that's why a fearful dog can't just listen to a cue that we're trying to give them in that moment, because their brain's gone. It's left the conversation. So if you understand this, it starts to change everything about dog training, because when you're trying to teach or reteach a dog, when they're in that moment of fear, we're already far too late. So what they need at that stage is not more control placed on them. They actually need more control returned to them. And this is sort of where the birth of Trust Step comes. For Trust Step comes out of the thinking that says, what would it look like to build a method that's specifically for dogs that are in that state? Not to suppress their dog's behaviour, but help return the brain to safety. And we wanted something structured, repeated and adaptable, but also something that respected the dog's agency. Something that didn't rely on forcing proximity or flooding them with different stimuli. And that's really how Trust Step began. So the process is simple, and it really is simple. A person calmly tosses a high-value treat near the dog and steps back. That's it. Nothing more complicated than that. There's no luring, there's no reaching, there's zero expectation. The retreat is the key, because when the person steps back, the pressure off the dog is removed. And when the dog starts to believe that maybe, just maybe, they have control over that interaction, that feeling of control is what allows the nervous system to downshift. And when the dog is able to approach this on their own terms, that's when the real learning and change can begin. Now, this sort of leads us on to really the power of predictability. And this is something else Trust gives us. It gives us that level of predictability. Dogs thrive on patterns, and not just routines in the household sense, but micro patterns of interaction. So they learn that when the person always tosses the treat and then steps back, this is a clear, predictable rhythm, and then this is established. The dog is now learning nothing bad happens here, the pattern is safe. Predictability lowers vigilance, and over time that predictability helps rewire how the dog interacts with the presence or interprets the presence of other people. So it goes from danger to this makes good things happen and I get to decide if I can engage. So what are we actually doing here? Well, what we are doing really simply and easily without force is reshaping the dog's emotional memory. We're not just trying to replace a behaviour, we're rewriting the association underneath that actual behaviour. So a good example here would be a case example, which will call from avoidance to approach. And I'm going to share with you a real life example. So we worked with a 2-year-old rescue dog, Sky, who had been found as a stray and adopted into a home where she showed extreme discomfort around unfamiliar men. She would growl, retreat, and often pace if someone tried to enter the same room. Her family had been told not to reinforce the fear by comforting her, which meant all she had to do, or all she was doing, was navigating these moments alone. And understandably, her behaviour started to escalate. So we had a chat to them, we explained the principles of Trust Step, and we reintroduced it to them, or we introduced it to them, I should say. So during the first session, we got a male visitor to enter the room and stand at a distance. Now, this male visitor was someone that the family knew, well attuned to dogs, so not somebody that was going to force the issue, could take direction, shall we say, in the nicest way, that we say that. So when we put him in the room and stood him at a distance, and this distance was well beyond Sky's stress threshold, he didn't face her directly, he didn't move towards her, he just simply tossed a treat to her side and then he stepped back. Now, she didn't approach straight away. That's okay, that's absolutely fine. We're not looking for quick wins here. So we just repeated this rhythm: toss, retreat, pause, toss, retreat, retreat, pause. Nothing more complicated than that. No pressure on the dog, no pressure on the person, just really calm sessions. And by the end of this training session, she was taking the treats. There was no growling, no hiding. So that was a really, really big win. Now, this is one of those things. Now, we'll always tell people that when we're doing behaviour modification or training, we go at the pace that the dog goes. There's no quick fix here. There's no, we're going to fix it in 5 minutes. It's going to be fixed in 10 sessions. It's going to be fixed in 2. It's going to be fixed in, 3.5. We go at the pace of the dog. Now, for Sky, after 3 sessions, she was approaching the visitor. So her body was loose. She was sniffing and her tail was wagging gently. This is a massive improvement to where she was a month or so ago when we first started it. So the key takeaway to this is this: she wasn't taught to tolerate people in the normal way of teaching a dog to sit, etc. She chose to interact, and this is where building her confidence begins from. It's not from pressure, but from voluntary experience. So one of the things you'll say is, well, is it just a trick? And, that's a fair question, but it is really a softer form of counter conditioning, I suppose. It sort of shares that DNA. But the emphasis on this is its choice and retreat, so it makes it distinct. It's not a method that relies on the dog performing or offering behaviours for a reward. The reward here is not about compliance, like a sit would be. It's about control and emotional recalibration. It's not a linear technique. Dogs don't progress in straight lines. We've seen dogs, take 3 steps forward and then need a few days to recalibrate. That's normal. The point is not speed, it's sustainability. So when we say compare this with other methods, let's compare it with some common alternatives, for an example. So traditional desensitization often involves controlled exposure without sufficient autonomy. It works, but it can easily backfire if your dog feels cornered or trapped. Flooding, well, don't even get me started on flooding, but this is still used in some circles, and this ignores your dog's stress levels entirely. And while the behaviour may eventually diminish, the cost to your dog's welfare by using flooding is significant. So, if anyone suggests that to you, my professional advice is do not follow it. That is only going to compound the issue and make it worse. The other one that you could probably sort of say that this is similar to, but is luring, which is where you can use to win your dog over, and it can override choice. And dogs may approach to get the food not because they feel safe. It creates a risk of what we would call a false positive. The dog is close, they're taking the treat, but actually they're still emotionally over that threshold. And this is where Trust Step comes in, because it avoids all those traps by keeping the relationship to proximity voluntary. This is why it's really, really effective long term. So how do we use this? Well, we've used it in dozens scenarios, be that in the homes, outdoor spaces, clinics, grooming salons, vets, etc. And we've really adapted this for a number of things. So dogs with history of trauma, puppies with poor early socialization or too much socialization, dogs that have returned from rescues or rehoming, elderly dogs who've grown more sensitive over time. And we've also taught it virtually, not just on a one-to-one here with us in the west coast of Ireland. We've taught it virtually to a number of clients all over the world, and it's had fantastic results. The principles travel well because they're based on what the dogs need neurologically, not just behaviourally. So in fact, Trust Step really has become one of the core part of our virtual consultations at Paws Academy, especially for families working with shy or shut down dogs who cannot yet cope with in-person visitors. And so, there are a few things that I probably should say, that like mistakes to avoid. So if you're implementing Trust Step, or perhaps you're another dog trainer and you're going to guide a client to follow our approach, there's a few key mistakes that can actually sabotage this process. So the first one is starting too close. So always begin this well outside the dog's stress threshold. If they can't take food, you're too close. Be consistent with your retreat. So don't be inconsistent. If you're inconsistent, such as the human that you have moves forwards or reaches out, the pattern breaks, and it's predictability here that makes this safe. Don't push for progress. It's tempting to hope for these big breakthroughs every time, but every step forward needs to be fully owned by your dog, not by you. And let's talk about the quality of treats. These need to be high value. Low value food will not override fear. Choose treats the dog genuinely wants, or don't start yet. Their kibble, it won't cut it in this situation, I'm afraid. You need to have something that is of a higher value to your dog for this to work. Now, if I just pause for a second and just go through really sort of what would be our final reflections. So at the heart of this work is the simple truth. Behaviour is information, and when our dogs tell us they're uncomfortable, we have a choice. We can push or we can listen. Trust Step is all about listening. It's about creating structured interactions that say, you are safe here, you can choose. Let me say that one again for you. It's a structured interaction that says to your dog, you are safe here and you can choose. It's taking that step back so the dog can step forwards. When we build these methods that honour agency and safety, we don't just change behaviour, we change experience, and that's where the real progress lives. So, really to close, if you'd like to know more about Trust Step, we've got a blog that we've written about this, and I'll link it somewhere into the show notes once this is published. And if you're a trainer, vet nurse, behaviourist, or canine professional, or just someone that's living with a dog who struggles with the world, we really hope that this episode has given you something useful to take forward. So thank you so much for joining us on Barks to Basics, and until next time, move slowly, give space, and
At Paws Academy, it's not just training, it's training